Did you know that Abraham, the father of nations, had a third wife whose story has been largely erased from the pages of history? Most people are familiar with Sarah, and some might even know about Hagar, but few have ever heard of Keturah, the woman who gave Abraham 6 more sons after Sarah's death. But who was Keturah really? And why is her legacy so often overlooked? What if I told you that her descendants played a pivotal role in shaping the world as we know it today? The truth about Keturah's life and her children is far more complex and powerful than most realize. Could it be that her bloodline holds hidden connections to nations and people whose influence is still felt across the globe? What is it that the Bible has left unsaid, and why have her descendants remained in the shadows? Prepare to uncover truths that challenge everything you thought you knew about Abraham's legacy and the true breadth of his influence. The fascinating part of this story is that for centuries Keturah's role has been shrouded in mystery, yet her impact cannot be denied. What if I told you that there is much more to Keturah's role in the divine plan than what meets the eye? In Jubilees 19 we read, "And after the death of Sarah, Abraham took another wife, namely from among his servants, for Hagar had died before Sarai. She bore him 6 sons, Josh and Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua." As we peel back the layers of this lesser-known chapter in Abraham's life, you'll discover how the children of Keturah helped shape the destiny of nations. Much like Hagar, who had served Sarah before becoming Abraham's concubine, Keturah's ties to the family run deeper than we might initially realize. Did she serve Sarah in ways that laid the foundation for her future with Abraham? How might she have contributed to the family dynamics in ways we have yet to uncover? These questions linger as we explore further. Can you imagine what it might have been like for Keturah woman in a household full of powerful figures to take on such an intimate role after the death of Sarah? Are you ready to uncover the forgotten history? Ancient Egyptian art and writings often depict Egyptians with dark skin, making it plausible that Keturah, as part of this household, may have shared these characteristics. Is it possible that her appearance reflected the culture and influence of one of the most powerful civilizations of the time? To truly understand the impact of Keturah's descendants, you must first dive into the depths of her story. While the Bible does not explicitly describe her appearance or heritage, we can make some educated guesses. What can we learn from Hera woman, who rose from Abraham's extended household to bear him 6 children? How did her presence in Abraham's life impact the future of the nations? But when we look deeper, a much richer narrative begins to unfold. We first encounter Keturah in the book of Genesis, where it is simply stated, Abraham took another wife, whose name was Keturah. In Genesis 12, during a famine, Abraham and Sarah traveled to Egypt, where mistaking Sarah for Abraham's sister, took her into his household. When Pharaoh discovered the truth, he returned Sarah to Abraham, but not before lavishing them with wealth, including servants. She bore him Zimon, Joshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and The deeper you go, the more you'll uncover. Let's get started. It's more than just a story, it's a revelation waiting to be uncovered. If this intrigues you, do you unforget to comment 777 below and make sure to hit that subscribe button so you do miss out on the powerful truths we're about to reveal. The truth about Abraham's forgotten wife and who are her real descendants. The story of Keturah is shrouded in mystery, with only brief mentions in the Bible. The bare facts are presented. Abraham, the father of nations, marries Keturah and has 6 children with her. But is this all there is to her story? The book of Jubilees offers us a deeper glimpse, shedding light on Keturah's background. The text goes on to clarify that Keturah was not just a stranger who entered Abraham's life later, but a member of his extended household. It is suggested that she may have been one of the servants within Abraham's household, likely serving Sarah before becoming Abraham's third wife. This connection with Abraham's household presents an intriguing possibility. Was Keturah more than just a servant? As we look more closely at Keturah's identity, we are left with several clues that help us picture her. One key moment in Abraham's life helps illuminate her likely background. The Bible tells us that Pharaoh's men sent Abraham away with his wife and all that he had, which implies that Abraham's wealth included servants from Egypt, given Egypt's prominence as a powerful kingdom at that time. It's not hard to imagine that some of these servants were Egyptian. Perhaps she had dark skin, dark hair, and brown eyes, aligning her physical features with the people of ancient Egypt. How might her heritage have shaped the lives of her children, the 6 sons who would go on to play significant roles in history? The story of Keturah invites us to reflect on the often overlooked individuals in biblical narratives. The mystery of Keturah is not just a question of her lineage, but of the divine purposes fulfilled through her purposes that continue to ripple through history today. And perhaps, as we uncover more about her, we might begin to see ourselves in her story, understanding how every part of God's plan, even the seemingly quiet chapters, has a profound and lasting impact on the world. The narrative surrounding Abraham's household and his marriages continues to unravel layers of mystery, particularly when we consider the role of his servants. A notable example of this is Hagar, the Egyptian servant who played a pivotal role in the birth of Abraham's first son, Ishmael. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar, and Sarai said to Abram, "Behold, now the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her." And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. We know from the Bible that Hagar was no ordinary servant. She was an Egyptian given to Abraham by Sarah, Abraham's wife, when Sarah herself was unable to bear children. The Bible states, "Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children." This passage paints a vivid picture of the desperate measures taken by Sarah in the face of her own infertility. The possibility remains tantalizing, especially when we recognize the recurring theme of Egypt in Abraham's life, and the relationships formed there had a lasting impact on his lineage. It was a deeply significant moment, one where Sarah's decision to give Hagar to Abraham would change the course of their family's history and powerful culture that influenced so much of Abraham's life. We are given the critical clue that Abraham left Egypt with many servants after his time there, which suggests that Keturah could very well have been another servant Abraham acquired during his sojourn in Egypt. An Egyptian servant, became a central figure in Abraham's legacy. Names like Midian and Medan are sometimes associated with regions that would be considered to the south of Egypt, and this has led to interpretations that suggest Keturah's ancestry may have been tied to Africa, perhaps even further south than Egypt itself. Perhaps, like so many other figures in the Bible, her story teaches us that no person's legacy is ever truly lost, and that God's plans are often bigger than we can see, and how every person, whether named in the Bible or not, has a place in God's grand story. One notable figure, St. John, suggested that Keturah might have been from Ethiopia or Cush regions located south of Egypt, while Genesis simply mentions the 6 sons, Josian, Medan, Midian, Isbah, and Shuth. The Book of Jubilees fills in the gaps with a more profound narrative, revealing Abraham's decisions about his children's inheritance. She bore him a son, Ishmael, who would later become the father of a great nation. But her story leaves us with a crucial question. Was Hagar's Egyptian heritage simply a coincidence, or was it part of a broader divine plan? Could it be that Keturah's bloodline, whether Egyptian or Ethiopian, was part of a greater divine plan, preparing the world for the nations that would emerge from her sons? But to the sons of the concubines, what if Keturah's story echoes this same pattern? Could the nations that came from Keturah, like those that came from Hagar, play a role in the unfolding of God's ultimate plan for the world? While the Bible doesn't directly specify Keturah's origins, we know that Egypt was a rich and diverse land, and it stands to reason that Abraham, like many of his contemporaries, would have brought servants from Egypt into his household. Considering that Hagar, the mother of Ishmael, was explicitly described as Egyptian, could Keturah also have had similar roots? After all, Egypt was not just a place of refuge for Abraham during the famine, it was a land of great influence. Could it be that Keturah, like Hagar, came from Egypt or its surrounding regions, tying her to the same ancient? Moreover, throughout history, various church fathers and later traditions have speculated on Keturah's origins. This hypothesis stems from the names of Keturah's sons, which some interpret as being linked to areas in Africa. What does this all mean for us? Whether Keturah was Egyptian, from Cush, or another ancient land, the underlying truth remains that her role in Abraham's life was significant and powerful. How do her descendants fit into the larger tapestry of God's promises to Abraham? The mystery of Keturah continues to captivate, inviting us to consider the deep connections between Abraham's family and the nations that would rise from his loins. As we reflect on her role, we are reminded of the many layers of history that connect us all. The story of Abraham and Keturah's children is not just a tale of family dynamics, it's also one of divine promise, legacy, and careful stewardship of God's covenant. The Book of Jubilees offers us a deeper insight into this moment, painting a clearer picture of Abraham's actions concerning his sons with Keturah. In Jubilees 19, we learn that after Keturah bore him 6 sons, Abraham, ever mindful of God's covenant with Isaac, took deliberate steps to ensure that Isaac alone would carry the divine promise. The passage reads, "And Abraham took concubines and wives, and he had children by them, and he gave all that he possessed to Isaac." Abraham gave gifts and sent them away from Isaac his son, while he was yet alive, eastward to the country of the east. This is not just a father's decision about his estates, the fulfillment of God's promise that Isaac would be the heir to the covenant. Why not allow them to share in the inheritance, a move that could have maintained family unity? But to the sons of his concubines, Abraham gave gifts, and while he was still living, he sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the east country. These words show us that Abraham, ever faithful to God's instructions, acted not just as a father, but as a steward of God's covenant, ensuring that Isaac would be the sole inheritor of the divine blessings. The story challenges us to look beyond personal feelings of fairness and instead focus on God's divine will for our lives and the destinies of those who come after us. So as we reflect on this moment in Abraham's life, we are reminded that God's plan is far bigger than any one individual or family. His promises unfold through generations, and sometimes the decisions we make today shape the destiny of future nations. But key figures in the establishment of tribes and nations that would play pivotal roles in the history of the ancient world. The 6 sons, each of whom settled in different regions, helped to form tribes that interacted with Israel throughout the centuries, and their legacy stretches across the Arabian Peninsula and beyond. How often are we too faced with decisions that require us to protect God's promises over our personal desires? Perhaps the answers lie buried in the sands of time, waiting for discovery. You might recognize the name Sheba from the famous Queen of Sheba, who visited King Solomon bringing priceless gifts and wisdom. His descendants were likely in the area that we know today as Saudi Arabia, and Ezekiel 27-20 even records Dedan as a trading partner of Tyre. What kind of relationship existed between these ancient trading hubs? Was it one of peace, or did it carry the weight of rivalry and power? In fact, Sheba's descendants are thought to have settled in the southern Arabian Peninsula or Ethiopia regions rich in spices and wealth. Could the Queen of Sheba have been a descendant of this very line? And other ancient texts provide us with glimpses into the lives of these figures and their importance. Their descendants, it's believed, would eventually be absorbed into the broader fabric of the Arabian Peninsula, and over time, their names would become synonymous with some of the most significant tribes in the region. Abraham's legacy invites us to think deeply about our own role in the grand narrative of God's promises. The answer lies in the sacred covenant that God made with Abraham. Isaac was the chosen vessel to continue that promise, and Abraham was determined to protect the purity of that divine legacy. Let's begin by looking at Keturah's firstborn. While the Bible gives no further details about his life, we do know that his descendants are believed to have settled in the Arabian Peninsula, particularly near the Red Sea. It is here that Zimran's descendants formed tribes, living as nomads, trading, and intertwining with the cultural and economic currents of the ancient world. Can you feel the weight of this decision? Abraham, the father of many nations, must have loved each of his sons dearly, yet he understood that the divine blessings could only rest on one, Isaac. Can you imagine the pain of sending your children away, knowing that they would not share in the same inheritance as their sibling? It was a pivotal moment in Abraham's life, one that shaped the future of his descendants and the destiny of Israel. Abraham's decision to send his sons to the east reflects his role in God's plan. He ensured that Isaac would carry the legacy of God's promise. Yet Abraham understood the bigger picture. His actions were part of a divine plan, one that would unfold over generations. But why, you might ask, did Abraham send his children away instead of raising them alongside Isaac? This moment, so carefully planned and executed by Abraham, mirrors what we find in Genesis 25. The Bible recounts, Abraham gave all he had to Isaac. But what does this action mean for us today? It speaks to the seriousness with which Abraham upheld God's promises, even when it meant difficult decisions. By sending Keturah's sons away with gifts, he protected the promise that Isaac would be the one through whom God's covenant would continue. But how do we reconcile this with our modern understanding of family and inheritance? Abraham's unwavering commitment to God. covenant invites us to consider how we too can serve as stewards of divine promises even in the face of personal sacrifice. Can we trust God's direction as Abraham did? Can we follow the path even when it leads us to make tough decisions for the sake of his divine plan? Keturah's sons, born after her marriage to Abraham, were not just the progeny of a revered patriarch. While the Bible itself offers only brief details about Keturah's sons, the book of Jude. But what exactly happened to these sons of Keturah? What role did they play in the ancient world? And how did their legacy intertwine with the story of Israel? Could Zimron's tribes have been among the earliest merchants to introduce exotic goods to distant civilizations? Next comes Jokshon, the father of Sheba and Didon. And what about Didon? Then there's Medan, whose name may not ring any bells, but his legacy is no less significant. Though little is recorded about Medan, his descendants are believed to have settled in Arabia as well, contributing to the rich cultural and tribal diversity of the region. Could his family have been among the builders of the early Arab dynasties, influencing the ancient world in ways we can only begin to imagine? And what secrets of early metalwork and trade did the Midianites hold, as suggested by archaeological findings linking them to early metalworking in the region? Yet some scholars believe his descendants may have settled in Mesopotamia, becoming part of the broader Semitic tribes that populated this ancient cradle of civilization. Bildad, known for his counsel to Job during his suffering, offers us a glimpse into the spiritual significance of Shuah's legacy. The Shuhites, as part of the nomadic tribes, are believed to have played a key role in the cultural and spiritual exchanges of the ancient world. Some of these tribes were involved in trade and early advancements in establishing trade routes that connected the Arabian Peninsula with ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. Were they simply distant observers, or did they have a hand in shaping the destiny of God's chosen people? Could Ishbak's line have contributed to the very essence of Mesopotamian culture, linking it with the Abrahamic legacy in ways still unseen, while Isaac inherited the covenantal blessings? The other sons of Abraham through Keturah spread his legacy far beyond the boundaries of Israel. As we explore the truth about Keturah and her sons, we uncover not just forgotten stories, but divine threads that weave through the very fabric of biblical history. Their descendants would go on to become powerful forces in the ancient world, shaping the nations surrounding Israel and contributing to the spread of Abraham's lineage across many lands. Why does Keturah's story matter, and what can it teach us about God's grand design for humanity? The 6 sons she bore for Abram didn't just vanish into the background. The impact of her descendants reached far beyond what anyone could have expected, contributing to the spread of Abraham's legacy and the fulfillment of God's promises to him. His use of unexpected individuals and his willingness to fulfill promises in ways that defy human expectations. Let's continue to uncover the richness of this narrative. They went on to establish tribes, nations, and cultures that would play pivotal roles in the history of the ancient world, influencing regions across Africa and Arabia. Now let's turn to Midian, perhaps the most prominent of Keturah's sons. Feel free to share your thoughts, and let's dive deeper into this hidden history together. The Midianites would have a long-lasting impact on the biblical narrative. Moses himself fled to Midian after killing an Egyptian, and it was there that he married Zip, the daughter of Jethro, a Midianite priest. Only by peeling back the layers of time can we begin to see the full picture of God's promises to Abraham and the nations that came from his loins. The Midianites would later clash with Israel in a dramatic battle during the time of the Judges, when Gideon, empowered by God, defeated them in a moment of divine triumph. How did the Midianites, once allies to Moses, become such formidable foes to Israel? Ishbak, like his brothers Zimron and Medan, remains a bit of an enigma. Lastly, we come to Shuah, whose descendants the Shuhites are most famously represented by one of Job's 3 friends in the book of Job. Could the Shuhites, as biblical history suggests, have been pivotal in preserving knowledge and wisdom that would later influence Israel and other nations? The descendants of Keturah's sons are often associated with the nomadic, trading peoples of Arabia who moved between the great empires of Egypt and Mesopotamia, linking civilizations in ways that continue to echo through history. What role did these tribes play in the rise of Israel and its conflicts? The biblical significance of Keturah's descendants is profound. How might these nations have influenced Israel's destiny? What divine purposes were at play in these far-reaching connections? Could these stories hold the key to understanding more about the nations that played such crucial roles in Israel's journey? What do you think? How do these forgotten sons shape your understanding of God's promises? Now let's pause for a moment and look at the bigger picture. While Keturah may not be as widely recognized as figures like Isaac or Ishmael, her story holds deep significance in the grand narrative of the Bible. Keturah, a seemingly secondary role in Scripture, is a powerful reminder that God's plan encompasses all people, even those who may seem peripheral or insignificant. Keturah's story offers much more than just the birth of nations. It reveals deep theological insights into God's plan for humanity. First, it is important to recognize that Keturah's role in the Bible is more than just being a wife and mother. She is a pivotal figure in the continuation of God's promises to Abraham. When God tells Abraham in Genesis 17:4-5 that he will be the father of many nations, Keturah's influence was not in the limelight, but rather in a subtle, fragrant way, akin to the incense or spice that is hidden, yet its aroma fills the room. This highlights a deeper truth about God's kingdom. God uses those who may seem small or unnoticed, but whose impact is profound. The Midianites, for example, are most famously involved in the story of Moses. The Midianites were involved in trade with Israel, but also fought them at certain points in history, particularly in the time of the Judges. This dual relationship, both adversarial and cooperative, illustrates a profound biblical truth, that the descendants of God's promises, even those outside the covenant, are interconnected in complex ways. Keturah, though often overshadowed by Sarah and Isaac, had a significant role to play in the divine narrative. Her story is a powerful reminder that God works through all kinds of people, and no one is excluded from his plan. Whether in the limelight or behind the scenes, each part of God's creation has a role to fulfill, and each person's story is integral to his grand design. The rise and fall of nations, their interactions, and their roles in biblical history are not random, but a part of God's grand design for the world. After fleeing Egypt, Moses found refuge in Midian, where he married Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro. What does this tell us? While Israel, through Isaac, was the chosen nation, the descendants of Keturah were also chosen to fulfill important roles in God's plan. These nations weren't cursed or neglected. Rather, they had their own purpose in God's greater scheme. Just as God told Abraham that his descendants would be more numerous than the stars in the sky, he demonstrated this through both Isaac and the children of Keturah. The expansion of Abraham's line in different nations shows that God's blessings are not confined to one group, but his purposes are woven throughout the world, touching all nations in some form. The Midianites, descendants of Keturah, played a significant role in shaping the course of Moses' journey and, by extension, Israel's liberation from Egypt. This connection shows that even descendants of seemingly peripheral figures in biblical history, like Keturah, had a direct impact on God's overarching story of salvation. Just as incense fills the room with its fragrance, Keturah's influence spread across the ancient world in ways that were subtle but powerful. He is not referring only to Isaac. The sons of Keturah are the living testament of that divine promise. Abraham's first wife, Sarah, was the woman who bore Isaac and received the promises of God's covenant. Yet after Sarah's passing, God chose to continue his covenant blessings through Keturah. This demonstrates God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promises to Abraham even after Sarah's death. Keturah was not a replacement for Sarah. Rather, she was an extension of God's plan to continue his work through Abraham's descendants. Her children were just as much a part of Abraham's divine inheritance as Isaac, and this tells us that God's blessings are not finite or limited by circumstances. Each of these sons founded tribes that settled in different lands, and they had unique destinies that unfolded in ways that impacted Israel's future. This should be a reminder for us. God's blessings are not limited. Just as he used Keturah's sons to build nations, he can use any of us, regardless of our position, to fulfill his plans in ways we cannot yet see. While the focus of many biblical teachings tends to be on Isaac, the son of promise, and the covenant that flows through him, Keturah's offspring remind us that God's blessings are not restricted to one line alone. Keturah's sons, through their settlements across various regions, ensured that Abraham's legacy spread beyond Israel, touching nations far and wide. This shows that God's promises of blessing and multiplication were meant to encompass many nations and tribes, not just one. Moreover, Keturah's story highlights the diversity of God's plan. Another fascinating aspect is Keturah's name itself. In Hebrew, her name can be interpreted as meaning incense or spice. This could symbolize something significant about her role. we also must not overlook the importance of Keturah's relationship with Abraham. There is also a profound connection between Keturah's sons and Israel's future challenges and triumphs. We also see that Keturah's descendants were involved in both peace and conflict with Israel. Keturah's children also remind us that God's purposes transcend individual lines or nations. What does Keturah's story ultimately teach us? It reminds us that God's plan is bigger than we can understand. In light of this, ask yourself, what role do you think you play in God's plan? Perhaps you feel like you're in the background, unnoticed or unimportant, but just as Keturah's descendants shaped history in ways they might not have known, your own life, no matter how small it may seem, could be part of a much larger purpose. God is always at work, weaving a tapestry of redemption that includes every person, from the well-known figures to those who are hidden. One of the most prominent descendants of Keturah's sons is the Midian. The ancient region of Dedan, mentioned in Ezekiel 27-20, was a prosperous trade hub, and its influence is felt even today. The name Dedan is still found in Dedanite tribes that historically populated the area of northwestern Arabia, which has long been home to Bedouin tribes. These tribes, descendants of Dedan, were integral to the region's commerce, culture, and expansion. Many modern Saudi Arabians, especially those from the desert tribes of the Hejaz region, can trace their roots back to these ancient peoples. From the ancient trading routes that connected Arabia with Egypt and Mesopotamia to the modern economic and political power of the Arabian Peninsula, the influence of Keturah's children endures. The Midianites, who were known for their involvement in early trade and metal, are still believed to have connections to modern-day tribes in the Arabian Peninsula. According to biblical accounts, the Queen of Sheba who visited King Solomon is believed to have been a descendant of Keturah's son Sheba. The legacy of Sheba is often tied to Ethiopia, where the Solomonic dynasty claims descent from this biblical queen. The story of Sheba's visit to Solomon is an important part of Ethiopian tradition, and the Ethiopian royal family has long maintained its descent from the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. Even today, Ethiopia is home to a diverse set of people who are thought to be the descendants of Sheba's ancient kingdom, particularly in the regions of the Abyssinian highlands. Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Syria are all regions historically linked to the Midianites, who were both allies and adversaries to Israel in ancient times, and Shua, who likely contributed to the formation of various nomadic and semi-nomadic tribes that spread across the Arabian Peninsula and parts of Mesopotamia, with descendants of Keturah's sons contributing to the cultural, spiritual, and economic fabric of nations from the Middle East and North Africa. The Arab people spread across countries such as Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Egypt all share historical connections to these tribes. Their languages, traditions, and cultures carry the imprint of the diverse tribes descended from Keturah's sons, whose interactions with Israel and surrounding nations are part of the larger biblical story. These tribes played significant roles in trade, governance, and the interweaving of cultures throughout the centuries, often blending with neighboring peoples, including those from Ishmael's line, leading to the development of modern Arab nations. These nations are the descendants of the very people who influenced the biblical narrative through their relationship with Moses, who fled to Midian and married the daughter of the Midianite priest Jethro. The people of Midian, as descendants of Keturah, have had a lasting impact on the spiritual and political history of the Arab world, both through peaceful trade and conflicts with Israel. So take a moment and reflect. How might God be using your life in ways you do unfully see yet? Whether your impact is visible or not, you too are a part of His divine plan, just as Keturah was. When we trace the descendants of Keturah's sons today, we begin to see how these ancient tribes are not just part of biblical history, but continue to have an influence in the modern world. While we may not always recognize their names or their direct impact, the legacy of Keturah's children has shaped entire regions and peoples. Keturah's sons are traditionally believed to have settled in the Arabian Peninsula, the regions surrounding Israel, and even parts of Africa. The tribes they founded are often associated with the Arab peoples who have played pivotal roles in shaping the history, culture, and geopolitics of the Middle East, North Africa, and beyond. Let's explore how the descendants of Keturah's sons are still present in our world today. The descendants of Keturah are seen in the Arab nations today, including the tribes of Midian, Dedan, Sheba, and others. Moving beyond Midian, we also find the descendants of Dedan in modern-day Saudi Arabia and the Persian Gulf. The descendants of Sheba, another of Keturah's sons, have left an indelible mark on Ethiopia and the southern Arabian Peninsula. In addition to these tribes, we find the descendants of the other sons of Keturah, Zimran, Med and Ishbak. In modern times, the legacy of these ancient tribes continues to shape the identity of the Arab world. In modern geopolitical terms, we can see how the legacy of Keturah's descendants lives on in the Arab nations of today, where a rich and complex history continues to unfold. Ask ChatGPT. The descendants of Keturah's sons still shape global affairs. Keturah's story serves as a powerful reminder of the divine providence that transcends generations. Even though Keturah herself is often forgotten or overshadowed in the biblical narrative, her descendants are part of a vast and continuing legacy that spans centuries and continents. Keturah's descendants are a living testament to God's ability to use all people, those in the forefront and those behind the scenes, to fulfill His divine purposes. Even if you feel you're in the background like Keturah, your influence can have a profound and lasting impact on the world. God's promises to Abraham that he would be the father of many nations are fulfilled not just through Isaac, but through Keturah's line as well, revealing that His plan for humanity is far-reaching and inclusive. As we reflect on Keturah's legacy today, we are reminded that no matter how small or seemingly insignificant a role may seem, it is still part of God's unfolding story. Even today, nations like Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, and Yemen are home to tribes whose ancestry might connect with Keturah's offspring. Perhaps you have ancestral ties to the tribes of Midian, Dan, or Sheba. Spiritual inheritance is just as important as biological lineage. Even if your ancestors do not hail from these ancient tribes, the story of Abraham and his descendants, including those through is symbolic of God's promise to bless all nations through His people. These regions are historically linked to the descendants of Keturah's sons, and their influence continues to be felt in modern cultures, particularly among the Arab people. Do you recognize the impact of your own life in the larger narrative of God's plan? When we think about Keturah's descendants, it's natural to ask ourselves, could we be connected to them in some way? What role do you feel called to play in God's story today? Perhaps in ways we can't fully understand. The line of Keturah's descendants continues to be part of the living, breathing story of God's redemptive work, and we, in our own lives, are caught up in that grand narrative. However, based on the patterns we see in Scripture, we can piece together a story of faith, dignity, and quiet fulfillment. In a world where history often feels distant and unrelated, it's profound to consider that the ancient lines of Abraham, including through Keturah, continue to shape the world today. She was not mentioned as part of the great covenantal promise that God made with Isaac. There is a certain dignity and quiet strength in Keturah's story, especially considering her significant role in the biblical narrative, but her lineage still played a key role in the broader purpose God had for Abraham's descendants. Her children, the founders of tribes that played roles in the development of Arabian nations, became influential forces throughout history. The Bible tells us that Abraham gave Keturah a prominent role as his wife after the death of Sarah, and together they brought forth a significant lineage. But once their children had grown and dispersed across the Arabian Peninsula, the narrative moves largely away from Keturah. It's a reminder that God's purposes stretch across generations and nations, reaching all who are called by His name. Whether through direct descent or spiritual connection, we are all part of the continuing story of God's work in the world. So let's take a moment and explore how you might relate to this vast lineage. While the Bible doesn't specifically name every individual descendant of Keturah, we know that the tribes originating from her sons became part of the Arab nations spread across the Middle East, North Africa, and beyond. Is it possible that you could trace your lineage back to these ancient tribes? Wouldn't you agree that it's a powerful truth to carry with you every day? The rich history of the Arabian Peninsula with its ancient trade routes, religious influence, and nomadic traditions ties back to Keturah's children. Could your family history be part of that journey stretching back thousands of years? Now, let's step back from the historical facts for a moment and think about it in a broader, more personal sense. Are you part of that promise? The New Testament tells us that through faith in Christ, all believers are grafted into God's family, making us spiritual heirs of Abraham's covenant. So while we may not be able to trace our exact physical lineage back to Keturah's sons, we can all claim a spiritual heritage that connects us to the promise made to Abraham. Even more, The question of whether you might be a descendant of Keturah's line encourages us to look at the broader scope of our own lives and legacies. Each of us plays a part in fulfilling God's divine plan, just as Keturah's children fulfilled their roles in shaping history. So whether through heritage or through faith, you are part of God's eternal family, and that's a legacy that transcends time and bloodlines. The fate of Keturah after her sons left and settled in distant lands is not explicitly recorded in the Bible, which leaves us with some room for speculation and reflection. After the birth of her 6 children, Keturah's life, much like Sarah's, shrouded in mystery, given the historical and cultural context. It is likely that Keturah lived out her days in peace and in the shadow of Abraham's influence, continuing the faith she shared with her husband. In the absence of detailed accounts about her death, we can infer that Keturah's legacy was rooted in the quiet continuation of God's plan through the nations her children established. She was not left in the shadows or forgotten. She had a unique and important purpose that extended well beyond her immediate family. Her sons helped fulfill God's promise to Abraham that he would be the father of many nations. Though she may not have been in the limelight, her life was instrumental in ensuring the continuation of God's broader vision for humanity. As for her final years, it is probable that Keturah remained a woman of faith, living out her life with a sense of peace, knowing that her legacy would live on in her children. Did she see the full impact of her sons' nations before she passed away? The Bible does not say, and her connection to Abraham made her an integral part of God's unfolding plan for the world. As for her ultimate fate, we can trust that, like many biblical figures, was welcomed into God's presence, a woman who faithfully played her part, not for recognition, but in service to God's greater design. Some lives, like Keturah's, are used by God in quiet, powerful ways. Her role in shaping the nations through her sons may not have been celebrated in the public eye, but God saw her contribution, and it was vital to the fulfillment of his promises to Abraham. Through her, nations were born, and the influence of Abraham's legacy spread far and wide. What does this tell us about the nature of God's choices? What we do know, however, is that her role as the mother of these tribes. Instead, he uses every part of his creation to bring about his divine purposes. Every person, no matter their apparent importance, is a thread in the intricate tapestry of God's will, him who have been called according to his purpose. Keturah's story challenges our assumptions about greatness, teaching us that even those in the background play an essential part in the story of redemption. Through her, we see that God's promises are not limited to one group of people, but extend to all nations, all descendants, and all corners of the earth. Interestingly, in the absence of a detailed story about Keturah's death, her life serves as a reminder that not all the work of God's kingdom is visible or celebrated in the ways we might expect. If you found this exploration of Keturah's story enlightening, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more insights into the hidden stories of the Bible. Her legacy speaks to those who are in the background, yet are still integral to God's greater plan for humanity. So while Keturah's death is not recorded, we can take comfort in knowing that her life was part of God's story. Stay blessed and keep seeking the truth hidden in his word. Keturah's legacy may be hidden in the shadows of more famous biblical characters, but it is no less essential in the grand narrative of God's promise to Abraham. And her legacy lives on, continuing to shape the world in ways that might not always be seen but are no less important. She may not have been as widely acknowledged as Sarah, but she was nonetheless significant in the eyes of God. What part of your life do you feel might be in the background? And how can you embrace the fact that God might be using it in his divine plan? And every person has a role in it, whether they are front and center or quietly fulfilling their part behind the scenes. Just like Keturah, each one of us plays a role in God's great narrative, and that role, no matter how quiet or unnoticed, is part of his eternal plan. In 1 Corinthians 1:27-28 it says, God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things. Have you ever considered how often God uses those who seem unimportant in the eyes of the world? Keturah, a woman whom many may have forgotten, was chosen by God to fulfill his plan. It shows that God does not base his plans on worldly fame, position, or power. In a world where we often lift up the famous and the whose role in the covenant is emphasized, Keturah's story is a reminder that no one is insignificant in God's sight. Romans 8:28 echoes this truth, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love. Keturah's life, though often overlooked, is an example of how God works through even the least likely vessels to bring about his greater plan. Her children, the tribes they founded, and the nations they birthed all played significant roles in shaping the course of history. Her story teaches us that God's plan for redemption is you aren't it comforting to know that even those who seem to be on the sidelines are still integral to God's work. The story of Keturah encourages us to step into our roles however hidden they may seem, knowing that we too are part of something far greater than we can see. Thank you for watching this episode of the Bible Storyteller. What do you think about Keturah's legacy? Is there a part of her story that you relate to or find inspiring? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, remember, God's plan includes everyone, even those whose names are only mentioned once.